Oh, thanks. I got to say, it's such an honor to be here today to celebrate Mercy Home for Boys and Girls, an organization which so deeply believes in the capacity of children to grow, to learn, to dream, if nurtured and nourished by caring and attentive adults. It's often said that the measure of a civilization is its ability to protect and care for its most vulnerable. And so it's places like Mercy which give us promise that we are a society at its core that values not only those who have, but also those who have not. I think we have so much to learn from Mercy. It recognizes that for some children in our city, their families, their neighborhoods, might themselves be struggling, unable to muster the kind of unmitigated love and attention any child requires. And so Mercy steps in. And so I want to begin this afternoon by sharing with you a brief story. And it involves a young immigrant from China, Deng Chen. And I know that Mercy doesn't deal much with immigrants, but I think it'll be clear enough why I want to share with you this story. I met Deng a number of years ago in New York, and I had the privilege to spend a fair amount of time with him and to hear the tale of his journey. When I met Deng, he was 23 years old, and he had grown up in Fujian province, an impoverished coastal area in China. And when Deng was 14, his parents sent him to America on his own. He had no say in the matter. They had hopes that he would eventually find a prosperous life here. But in order to send him, they had to pay smugglers, snakeheads in China, $45,000, which Deng had to repay. And if he didn't, the snakeheads would come after his parents. So for 4 years, Deng, who was utterly alone, without family, without friends, worked 12-hour days, 7 days a week in Chinese restaurants along the East Coast and in the Midwest, until at the age of 18, he had repaid that debt. Deng was this incredibly determined kid. He was an autodidact. He taught himself English, and he read voraciously. And amazingly enough, he had enrolled himself while he was working in the restaurants in high school in New York. And there, a teacher, sensing Deng's profound loneliness, suggested that he go to Buffalo, where there was a center for refugees. And so after graduating from high school, Deng took a bus to Buffalo, all his belongings stuffed into one small suitcase. He had no friends, and as you might imagine, had a somewhat rocky relationship with his parents, who clearly loved him and wanted the best for him, but also by some measure had abandoned him. And it was there in Buffalo that he fell into the protective embrace of 4 women. There was a congressman's wife who worked at the refugee center. There was a director of a homeless shelter where Deng ended up living for 2 years. There was a high school teacher and an immigration lawyer. Deng's life changed. In fact, it was transformed. He came out of his shell. He went on to college. He obtained his citizenship. And most importantly, he felt less alone in the world. It was under the wings of these 4 women that Deng was able to flourish. And I mentioned Deng's tale because for me it's a reminder that yes, children are resilient and children are resourceful, but without the guidance, without the protection, without the encouragement, without the ear of adults, children, however strong and determined, won't find their way. And that is the place of Mercy. It not only recognizes it has created a setting in which children who are bearing the weight of struggles in their families or struggles in their neighborhoods can be embraced by adults who can help them navigate, adults who let them know there's someone there to shield them from their fears, to share in their laughter, to wipe away the tears. Mercy lets them know that there are indeed adults who can and will walk with them. Mercy also recognizes, and this is one of the things I really admire about Mercy, also recognizes the place of family. And so it works not only with the children in their care, but also with their parents and their siblings. That feels to me so essential. This acknowledgement that to fortify the spirit of children, we also must fortify the spirit of families. As I've spent some time, many years, in some of the city's most distressed neighborhoods, of which there are far too many, I've been struck by the silence in the lives of the children that I've met. And there have been two kinds of silences I've encountered. One, which I think is fairly obvious, a kind of institutional silence in the lives of children, an inability of institutions like the schools, the police, the city government to respond to what's become a weekly, if not daily, crisis in the lives of many of our children. And I remember while working on my first book, There Are No Children Here, there was a young boy, 10 years old, Alonzo Campbell, a friend of Lafayette and Farrow, the two boys that I spent time with. And Alonzo, on a Saturday afternoon, was walking to the boys' club and was shot in the back of the head. And I'll get to back to Alonzo in a minute. But that next week, there was, you may remember the terrible tragedy at the Hubbard Elementary School in Winnetka when a woman, Lori Dan, stormed into the school and shot 7 children, killing one of them, an 8-year-old boy, Nicholas Corwin. It made national news. Citizens mobilized to deal with the tragedy. There were crisis teams of psychologists and social workers brought in. Teachers received instructions on how to deal with the kids. The governor called for tighter school security. There were demands for tighter gun control legislations. Well, Alonzo fortunately lived, but no one counseled Alonzo. No one comforted his friends Lafayette or Farrow. No adult walked into that community and said, I'll do what I can to make sure that such an incident doesn't happen again. And that's the kind of institutional silence I've encountered time and time again. But there's also another kind of silence that is, for me, has been striking, and it's a kind of what I think of as a self-imposed silence on the part of many of our children growing up in our distressed neighborhoods, an unwillingness, if you will, to share their stories. And what I've come to realize is that this reluctance has everything to do with this fear among children that if they share their stories, that they won't be believed. And I will tell you, I've been confronted with this time and time again. And I remember first thinking about this. This is right after the publication of There Are No Children Here. We were fortunate to have the book made into a TV movie. And when the screenwriter came out from New York, he was a playwright, and I was to be kind of his tour guide to introduce him to the neighborhood and the people I wrote about. And he was this very quiet, gentle man. And as we began to spend time together, I began to get this uneasy feeling that he didn't believe all that I'd written. And so I took him to the worst of the high-rises. I introduced him to some of the gang members and introduced him to some of the others in the community. And then on the fourth and last day, he and I and 2 friends of mine went out to lunch at a restaurant then called Edna's on Madison Street. And as we were sitting in our booth having lunch, a group of boys walked by, and one of them pulled a pistol out of a brown paper bag and started shooting. And needless to say, we were scared for our lives, and we dove under the table. And I remember as we lay there, literally one on top of the other, all I could think to myself is, now he's going to believe me. And I mention this because it's this self-imposed silence, I would argue, is the most destructive kind of silence there is. It is a kind of silence that will slowly sap the spirit out of the most spirited of people. And what it says to me is something very, very simple. We've stopped listening. We've stopped believing. And that, for me, is what feels so essential about Mercy. Those at Mercy not only listen to the voices of the children they take in, but they believe. I always remember what a counselor once told me who worked with children who, for one reason or another, were on their own. And she said to me, I think sometimes they just need someone to witness what's happened to them. That, of course, is a legacy Mercy has created. It bears witness and forces the rest of us to bear witness as well. Mercy, in its own quiet, tenacious manner, refuses to bow to the forces bearing down on children growing up in neighborhoods and in families that are struggling. Mercy refuses to concede defeat. I've seen it firsthand, up close, in the case of our featured speaker. Mercy wouldn't let go. Mercy looks at these children and sees what is and imagines what can be. Mercy looks at these children and sees in each of them a measure of honor, of dignity, of promise. Mercy restores our faith in the ability of children to flourish, if nurtured, if cared for, if pushed. Mercy restores our faith in the human spirit. So now is the part that I'm really looking forward to, and that is to introduce what I think of as our keynote speaker tonight, or today, and that's Marcelo. I first met Marcelo while working on my most recent book, An American Summer. And when I met Marcelo, he was at a crossroads. He had just turned 17 and was facing what seemed like some daunting obstacles. And every Sunday over the course of a year and a half, I would come by Mercy and bring with me a couple of sandwiches, the same sandwiches every week from the same Italian deli. Marcelo and I both like routine. And we would eat lunch. We'd talk about sports and politics and school. And then we'd play a couple of games of chess, and Marcelo would inevitably beat me. And then we'd sit around for a couple of hours talking about his journey, which he's going to share with you today. I miss those Sundays. Marcelo is this incredibly remarkable individual, I think more remarkable than I think he knows. He's thoughtful and incisive and curious and at times deeply profound. It's why he both opens and closes An American Summer. It's why he gets the first and last word, which he also manages to do in conversation as well. I feel so deeply fortunate to consider Marcelo a friend, to have been there for a part of his journey. He's been an absolute inspiration. Marcelo, I just hope we can continue our conversations and continue our chess games. I've been practicing. Friends, it's my honor to introduce to you Marcelo.